Dylan, it's Dean Legge and Dylan Webber. What's the most memorable thing you've done on your birthday that you can talk about on a
Oh,
broadcast podcast?
most memorable thing I've done on my birthday.
Yeah.
When I was in sixth grade, uh, we got a limo because we had a coupon for like a 3-hour limo ride for free. So some friends and I took that out to a barbecue place in Lano, Texas, and it's my favorite barbecue place in the world. So we took a limo out to West Texas to get some barbecue.
Well, Braylon Oliver committed to Georgia, so take that.
Well, yeah, that's a little bit bigger of a deal than
Yeah, it's
getting some barbecue.
Georgia's first commitment of the 2021 cycle. You know, the Dogs still have plenty of ways to go here in this 2020 cycle. If you want to learn more about Braylon Oliver, is a kid a DB, a pretty tall DB, a big DB. You can read that on Dogpost, DAWGPOST.com. You know that already. This is Riding Home with Dean Legge and Dylan Webber. Dylan, we're getting closer and closer to the season. Today, Georgia goes inside, and I think at the practice facility, I think today is probably the last vestige of what you would call camp. And you can see Kirby and them scaling back a little bit by heading inside. I don't think it was overwhelmingly hot today, but they did go
Nah,
inside.
yeah, and I think they still have tomorrow with camp technically.
Yeah,
Um,
if you want to call it that. I don't know.
I I don't even know what they're going to do tomorrow. They might just be in shells again with shoulder pads and athletic shorts. So it's hard to say exactly what they'll be. But, I mean, yeah, we are at about the end. I think everyone's just kind of tired of it. And, players and us included just want to get onto the game week. I mean, we want this shit to get started.
Well, it's interesting, starting, essentially, when you got the Gators and the Canes, that'll be fun. I will also watch Hawaii and Arizona because, I have no personal life. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm sure your wife loves that.
Well, I'll be in D.C. watching Mikel Sherman, so I don't know that she would watch it too. She does not mind the late night, kind of bizarre Hawaii games, the Pac-12 games. But they got to be competitive. We watch a lot of Pac-12 in our house because a lot of times it's 11 o'clock kickoffs, which are 8 o'clock over there, are about the only time that you can get sanity in our home. Right now, the children are running around competing, screaming. I'm not certain if we have all four eyes left, but the season is here, and I'm definitely excited. I'll say I was talking to an old friend of mine today, and he feels like this is these are his words. I'll have more about this than what we were hearing as Sunday gets here, but he feels like a lot of people who are football people think this is a Georgia Clemson thing, and that Alabama is good, but maybe not as good as those two. Now, conventional thinking would tell you that that's not the case, but he does. How far away are we from something like that? I mean, I think Alabama has
I
plenty to
mean,
say, but how far
I
away
don't.
is that?
I wouldn't say. I don't know if we'll ever be there necessarily until
Right.
Saban leaves. I think it'll more so just be a Clemson, Alabama, Georgia thing.
So
You know,
there's no scenario where Nick Saban is at Alabama in your mind where they're not good, like where they go, perhaps they go 10-2 and they lose to someone, or say 11-2 they lose in the conference championship game.
I mean, I guess that's possible because they play Georgia next year in the regular season.
Yeah.
So that's certainly possible. And they lose to Georgia and then Auburn, so that's possible.
Well, I think. Well, I mean, Auburn's beaten them more lately, but I would think that LSU would have the better chance. But honestly, and I know you'll really love this, I think A&M is the one that's trending towards being the most competitive in the West.
Again, just in general, or
In general, this season, the two teams that have the most difficult schedule are Texas A&M and South Carolina. I mean, they both play Clemson, Alabama, Georgia. They will know. They will know who, in their mind, who the best team is. And the last 2 years, last season, a lot of the Carolina guys and the Alabama guys said it too, that from their perspective, it was Georgia that was more difficult to play than Clemson. And Clemson, of course, has a reason to be kind of salty about that. because they won both those games with Alabama and South Carolina. I know they won by more than double digits in the Alabama game. I'm pretty sure they won by 2 touchdowns against Carolina. But
Well,
go ahead.
I just think it's when you play Georgia compared to Clemson. And I'm not saying this means Georgia's better by any means, but I think it's just more physically wearing on you.
It is.
I mean, just how they play. They just really go in there and they just run all over you, and that's tiring.
Well, the thing about it is, though, is that you don't have to play football the same way as everyone else, and Clemson has perfected what Baylor and Auburn even tried to do, which was have a spread them out offense that's predicated on scoring points, and not necessarily with a power run game in the traditional sense. I mean, Florida did this too in the late '90s. Clemson has had more success, I guess, technically not. But they've won 5 conference championships in a row. They won 2 of the last 3 national championships. I mean, the Gators never won 5 conference championships in a row, but I would argue that the winning the SEC in the late 90s is very different than the ACC right now. But anyway, back to the discussion. We're not talking about practice. We can always talk about practice, but it is something that, and this guy's not a Georgia guy that said that to me, by the way. He doesn't, that's not what he does. But it was interesting to hear him say that. I just think that the path for Georgia and Alabama or LSU, A&M, Florida, whoever you want to put in there, is just so much more complicated than anyone else, maybe with the exception of Ohio State and Michigan, that it's just asking a lot to say, hey, these guys will be in the playoff for sure. Even though the betting odds are firmly in place of Alabama and Clemson, Clemson's path should be much easier than Alabama's.
I mean, you think it would be the easiest, honestly.
It is the easiest, yeah.
I mean, because Alabama, at least, they got to play Auburn, and I'm still kind of unsure on where Auburn will be this year, but you can never count them out.
They are going to have to be markedly better than they were a season ago.
Auburn?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, but I feel like anytime Gus is on the hot seat is when you really see one of their better seasons.
Yeah, but look, man, let's just – I'm going to Google Gus real quick. And that's sort of true. That's not really always the case with him. I mean, he's had 2 really, really great years at Auburn, which were the 2013 seasons and the 2013 season and the 2017 season. Do you know how many games is the most games he's won in a season outside of those 2 years?
Something I know it's not great. Is it 7?
It's 8-5.
8-5.
So
okay,
12-2, win the conference with 2 miracles, and you get credit for miracles. 12-2, win the conference, lose to Florida State on the last play of the game for the national championship. That's not bad. 8-5 the next year, 7-6 the next year, 8-5 the season after that, 10-4, a really good year in 2017, wins over number 1 Georgia and Alabama, who I think was also number 1 at the time. No, they were 2. But anyway, back to back. And they lose to Georgia and lose to UCF. And then last year they were 8-5 with a losing record in the conference.
And even then, 10-4 is impressive. 10 wins is always impressive. But, I mean, for what they were, you expected better. You expected more, especially. I mean, because they did beat the 2 top teams. They beat the 2 top teams in the nation that year.
Well, I stand corrected. I mean, Georgia was the one, and so was Alabama. So they beat, and they were hot. And then they just they lost to Clemson that year. That was a decent Clemson team by my recollection. They went into the playoff, but that was not one of the better Clemson teams of late. They lost 16-14, and then they boat raced a lot of people that year. Auburn. I mean, one of their tougher games was Mercer, but I mean they blew out Missouri, they blew out Mississippi State, they blew out Ole Miss. They lose to LSU on I think the last play of the game or very close to it. They blow out Arkansas. They blow out A&M. They blow out Georgia. They blow out Louisiana Monroe. They solidly defeat Alabama. It was the first time in a long time that Bama had lost by double digits, and they sure did. And then Georgia, it was the SEC championship game a blowout that year to you? They won by 21.
It's one of those games where when you're watching it, it doesn't really feel like a blowout because it was pretty close up until midway through that third quarter.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Georgia was only up 2 touchdowns going into the fourth, by my recollection. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly.
That sounds
Let's see.
about right.
Georgia was up. No, Georgia was only up 6. They were up 13-7 going into the fourth, and then Georgia scored 15 points. However you do that. Did they go for 2 with Terry? That's what happened. They scored a 2-point conversion with Terry, right? Terry Godwin.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
You like that? Right about that? You like that? I don't know how we got off on Auburn, but I don't think anyone outside of these teams I'm about to say can win the SEC. And I'm not necessarily going in order here, but some of them, the odds are very low. Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, Florida. And I think the last 2, I just am going to have to see it to believe it. I don't think that Texas A&M can survive their schedule. And number 2, with the Gators, I mean, first of all, I don't think they're going to beat Georgia. So that would mean that they would need Georgia to lose twice at least, and they would have to be perfect the same way, and they would have to win whoever they play against the West. So the likelihood of the Gators doing it is low. They can do it, but it's low. And then LSU has the bodies and so forth. They can't seem to be competitive with Alabama.
No, it's always hyped. That game is always so hyped up, and it never ends up being that great.
Well, why do you think CBS went away from that game this year? I mean, I think because go ahead.
Because last year it was supposed to once again be like the best game of the year, and it was just a blowout.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
I mean, even the one game in 2011, that was hailed as I think Sports Illustrated put in its top 10 games of all time.
It was not a good game, dude. It was bad.
No. They ended 6-9.
Yeah, it was 9-6 in overtime. There were like 4 missed field goals. It was disgusting. It was not quality football. I don't know. We heard the same thing. This is a little bit before your time, but I remember the 2006 Michigan-Ohio State game. Everybody was honking that those 2 teams should play again because they played a real close game. It was 30-something to 30-something. And, you fast forward to the national championship game, and the Gators blow out Ohio State. And that game was not close. And everyone's talking about that was the best game, almost in theory of the decade, that 06 Michigan-Ohio State game. We let our perceptions of something that's happening in the moment far too often, skew reality. I did not think at the time that the Rose Bowl with Oklahoma and Georgia was a great game. I didn't. I remember leaving the Rose Bowl with you and Wes and Matt and being like, that was a really good game, And someone said something like, "Yeah, that's going to be the greatest Rose Bowl of all time outside of the Texas USC game."
I think I was saying that,
but
I still stand by that.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, if you go back and look at so that game was, top 10 games all the time. Georgia, Oklahoma were playing, that was basically for all the marbles. That was a great game. That was way better than that snoozer, 9-6 snoozer that all these baseball nerd college football people were talking about being one of the greatest games of all time. Give me a break. No one scored. It was awful.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe people really like that. Maybe I don't know. If people get. I don't know. Some people really like great defense and missing field goals, but like me personally, I like to see a shit ton of points. That's fine.
I'm gonna tell you right. Go ahead.
Of course, I don't want to see what is like the Baylor Washington game from when RG3 was there, yeah. but I mean how it was in that Rose Bowl was awesome. I mean, I like stuff like that.
Well, it was that Alabama LSU game was a great struggle between defenses, but I mean, like for instance, that pulled in a 11.5 Nelson rating, and I'm just gonna have to go real quick to see what Georgia Alabama in 2012 pulled in, because that was a great game too. I mean, that was a better game than that garbage that we watched in Tuscaloosa. I mean, I'm not judging the teams, but it just wasn't a good game. I mean, it was not a good game. Period. So I don't know, but because it drew so much attention, and because those two met later for the national championship, that game is still perceived as a great game. So Georgia Alabama a year later drew a 9.8. So a lot of people watched LSU Alabama, the regular season game. Not quite 20 million, but a lot. So it was a huge audience. But anyway, back to the point. We're almost 20 minutes into this. We got to wrap this up. What happened at practice? What did we miss? Anything new?
Let's roll it. Not anything new. I mean, Jamari Sawyer was not there, and Kobe Dean was not there. Swift was back in a normal red jersey. So, it was full contact again for him.
Right.
Other than that, I mean, it's really just not much. It's been kind of quiet on that front.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at this thing too. Alabama-LSU, that was 1 versus 2, if I'm not mistaken. And it was the first time that it had been a 1 versus 2 since that 2006 Michigan-Ohio State game. And that was, it had been built up as a game of the century game. And there have been some pretty shitty game of the century games. Notre Dame, Michigan State, 10-10. That's pretty bad. But there have been some good game of the century games too. For instance, that Miami Penn State game, it was only 14-10. I very much remember that game. That game was epic, but it came down right to the end. And then the Florida State Notre Dame and several of the Miami Florida State games. But I'm just not sure how many games can top Texas SC. Florida Alabama from 2009 was a big deal. But, game of the century, I don't know.
Maybe we should just stop calling games game of the century before the game actually happened.
What was an epic game, and it didn't really matter a ton? By the way, too, that LSU Alabama game, the outcome was completely irrelevant, as it turns out. Completely irrelevant.
Yeah, that's true. That's an even worse part of it.
The LSU A&M game that ended the season, the regular season last year, was an epic game. I mean, epic. But
it was. I mean, at about the fifth overtime, I was watching with you.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. I was like, I just wanted to go home. But I was like, I can't leave until this game's over. Like, I've invested this much.
Yeah.
But it got to the point I was like, please.
What, did we watch the end of it? I mean, I know I did.
Oh, yeah. I was falling asleep at the end of it, yeah, but we watched all of it.
Some games are awesome. That 9-6 game in 2011 was not that great. But CBS has gone away from that because they feel like LSU Alabama does not have the potential to draw the way that Notre Dame Georgia does. It's that simple. That's what it is, and that's what this season is building towards. All the quote unquote boring practices, or all this stuff. Everybody's going to see, the Vanderbilt game is going to be judged on how does Georgia look. Did they look good enough to beat Notre Dame, etc., and go on from there. That's all this season's going to be, is constant build-up towards Notre Dame and towards that night game. It's interesting just to even say Notre Dame coming to Athens. It's so rare, but that will be a huge game for Georgia and Notre Dame for sure. Notre Dame's really got to win that game. They're the ones that are in position to have to win it. All right, Dylan, we will let you go. Everybody go to dawgpost.com, dawgpost.com. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you on the website.